My name is Margaret, and I'm 32 years old. I used to believe family meant everything. Here I am sitting in my car outside my childhood home, staring at my phone showing 68 missed calls from my father. The last text message burns into my memory like a scar. Don't come to the family reunion. We're cutting ties. My hands are shaking as I grip the steering wheel, wondering how we went from Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings to this moment of complete devastation. The house where I learned to ride a bike looks the same, but everything else has changed forever. Before I tell you what happened that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from, and please hit that like button and subscribe. You won't believe how this family drama unfolded and the shocking truth I discovered about my father's business. Trust me, this story will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty. Let me take you back to where this all started, because my family wasn't always broken. We were the Harrisons, and for 32 years, I thought we were perfect. My father Harold is 65 years old and built Harrison Construction from nothing 25 years ago. He started with just a pickup truck and a toolbox, working 16-hour days until he became one of the most respected contractors in Central Ohio. My mother Agnes, 62, taught elementary school for 38 years before retiring. She was the glue that held our family together, organizing every birthday party, every holiday gathering, every moment that mattered. I have two older siblings who I looked up to my entire life. Kenneth is 38, an electrical engineer who graduated from Ohio State with honors. He married his college sweetheart Sandra, and they have twin boys who are now 15. He always seemed to have everything figured out, and Dad constantly bragged about his success to anyone who would listen. Then there's Donna, 35, who became a registered nurse and married a cardiologist named Gerald. They live in a beautiful house in Columbus, about 2 hours away from our small town. I'm the baby of the family, and I chose a different path. While Kenneth went into engineering and Donna into medicine, I became an elementary school teacher just like Mom. I teach 3rd grade at the same school where Mom worked for decades. I live alone in a cozy 1-bedroom apartment about 45 minutes from my parents' house. I never married, though I had a few serious relationships that just didn't work out. My family never made me feel bad about being single, and Dad always said he was proud of me for following my passion for education. Our family traditions were sacred. Every month we gathered at Mom and Dad's house for Sunday dinner. Mom would cook her famous pot roast with mashed potatoes, and we'd spend hours around the kitchen table talking about work life and dreams. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter happened at their house. Their 2-story colonial home sits on 3 acres with a big backyard where we used to play football during family gatherings. The kitchen has a huge farmhouse table that seats 10 people, and the living room has a stone fireplace where we'd gather for gift exchanges. I was always the one who helped Mom organize everything. I'd arrive early to set up decorations, help with cooking, and make sure all the cousins and extended family felt welcome. Dad would always hug me when I walked in and say, "There's my little helper." He'd tell everyone how proud he was that I chose teaching, how I was making a difference in children's lives, just like Mom did. Harrison Construction employed 15 people at its peak. Dad built shopping centers, office buildings, and custom homes throughout 3 counties. He was known for quality work and fair prices. The company office sat in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of town, and I remember visiting as a child, watching Dad review blueprints with clients and coordinate job sites. He taught me about hard work, integrity, and treating people with respect. Our family dinners were filled with stories about Dad's latest projects. He'd describe challenges he'd overcome, employees he'd helped through tough times, and clients who became lifelong friends. Mom would beam with pride as he talked, and Kenneth would ask technical questions about engineering aspects. Donna would share stories from the hospital, and I'd talk about my students' achievements. We felt connected, supported, and genuinely happy to be together. The house itself held so many memories. My childhood bedroom still had the same pink wallpaper I'd picked out when I was 12. The basement family room had the old pool table where Kenneth taught me to play. The backyard had the tire swing Dad hung when I was 7, and the vegetable garden where Mom and I spent summer afternoons. Every corner of that house represented love, stability, and the foundation of who I thought our family was. Everything started changing about 3 months before what would become the most devastating day of my life. The first sign something was wrong came during one of our regular Sunday dinners in early March. Dad seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly and excusing himself to take calls in his study. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd brush me off with, "Just work stuff, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." The phone calls became more frequent over the following weeks. Every time I called Dad, he was either too busy to talk or would cut our conversations short. This was completely unlike him. For my entire adult life, Dad and I talked at least 3 times a week. He'd call to check on my students, ask about my weekend plans, or just share something funny he'd heard on the radio. Suddenly, those calls stopped. When I'd visit Mom and Dad's house, I noticed Dad looked tired and stressed. He'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. His usually perfectly organized desk in the study was covered with papers, and I glimpsed words like payment schedule and loan extension on documents he'd quickly flip over when I walked in. The man who used to greet me with bear hugs and jokes now seemed anxious and distracted. Mom tried to explain away Dad's behavior. "Your father's just dealing with some challenging projects right now," she'd say, but I could see worry in her eyes too. She'd been married to Dad for 41 years and knew him better than anyone. During our private conversations in the kitchen while Dad was on yet another mysterious phone call, Mom would confide that he was working later than usual and having trouble sleeping. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in late March. I decided to surprise my parents with homemade lasagna and garlic bread. I let myself in through the back door as I'd done countless times before, but stopped short when I heard Dad's voice coming from his study. He was speaking louder than usual, and his tone was desperate in a way I'd never heard before. "I understand the payment is overdue, but I need more time," he was saying. "The client hasn't paid us yet, and I can't make the payment until they do. Please, I've been banking with you for 20 years. I just need until the end of next month." There was a long pause. Then Dad's voice became almost pleading. "What do you mean, foreclose? We can work this out. I have assets. The business is solid." I stood frozen in the hallway holding the lasagna pan and trying to process what I'd just heard. Foreclose Dad's business was supposed to be thriving. He'd always presented Harrison Construction as stable and successful. The idea that he might be in financial trouble was completely foreign to everything I believed about our family's security. When Dad emerged from his study and found me standing there, his face went pale. "Margaret, I didn't hear you come in. How long have you been standing there?" I could see panic in his eyes, and for the first time in my life, my strong, confident father looked vulnerable and scared. "Dad, what's going on? I heard you talking about payments and foreclosure. Are you in some kind of trouble?" I set the lasagna on the hall table and reached out to touch his arm, but he pulled away. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Just a temporary cash flow issue. You know how construction works. Sometimes clients are slow to pay, but everything always works out in the end." His voice was forced and cheerful, completely different from the desperate tone I'd overheard moments before. "Don't worry your pretty little head about it. These are grown-up business problems." That phrase, grown-up business problems, stung more than he probably intended. I was 32 years old, a college graduate with a master's degree in education and a responsible adult who managed my own finances perfectly well. But Dad had a way of making me feel like I was still his little girl who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of the adult world. During that month's family dinner, Kenneth and Donna both commented on Dad's changed demeanor. Kenneth asked directly if the business was okay, and Dad gave the same dismissive response about temporary cash flow issues. Donna mentioned that Dad seemed tired and suggested he consider taking a vacation. But none of us pushed harder for real answers, trusting that Dad would handle whatever was wrong and tell us when he was ready. The most telling moment came when Dad missed our April family dinner entirely. In my entire life, he had never missed a family gathering unless he was hospitalized. Mom explained that he had to travel to Indianapolis for an urgent client meeting, but something about her explanation felt rehearsed and hollow. Kenneth and Donna seemed concerned but accepted the explanation. I, however, couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't getting the whole truth. 2 weeks after Dad missed our family dinner, I decided I needed to see for myself what was happening at Harrison Construction. I'd been to Dad's office countless times over the years, bringing him lunch or just stopping by to chat. The familiar drive to the converted warehouse should have felt routine, but my stomach was tied in knots as I pulled into the parking lot. The first thing I noticed was how empty the lot looked. Usually there were trucks, trailers, and equipment scattered around the property. Work crews would be loading supplies or mechanics would be servicing vehicles. That Tuesday morning, I saw only 3 pickup trucks and Dad's sedan. The bustling activity I'd grown up seeing was completely absent. Inside the office, the silence was deafening. The receptionist's desk was empty and the main workspace where project managers and estimators used to work was practically deserted. I found Linda, Dad's secretary of 12 years, sitting alone at her desk, looking overwhelmed and stressed. Linda had always been like an aunt to me, and seeing her distressed immediately confirmed my worst fears. "Oh, honey," Linda said when she saw me, and I could hear relief and worry in her voice. "I'm so glad you're here. Your father is in his office, but I have to warn you, things are really rough right now." She glanced around nervously, then lowered her voice to a whisper. "Margaret, I don't think he's told your family how bad things really are." Linda explained that Harrison Construction was on the verge of collapse. Dad had secured a loan for $1.2 million to finance a major strip mall project, but the primary investor had filed for bankruptcy, leaving Dad responsible for the entire amount. The monthly payments on the loan were nearly $15,000, and without the expected payments from the failed project, Dad couldn't meet his obligations. The worst part was what Linda told me next. To secure the loan, Dad had used the family home and several business assets as collateral. If he defaulted on the payments, the bank could seize everything: the house where I'd grown up, the business he'd spent 25 years building, and the retirement savings Mom and Dad had accumulated over 4 decades of marriage. "He's been letting people go, gradually trying not to alarm anyone," Linda continued. "We went from 15 employees to just 4 in the past 2 months. He sold most of the heavy equipment and 2 of the work trucks. Your father hasn't taken a salary in 6 weeks, and I know he's been using his personal credit cards to cover basic business expenses like utilities and insurance." I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Everything I'd believed about our family's financial stability was built on lies, or at least massive omissions. Dad, the man who taught me about honesty and integrity, had been hiding a crisis that threatened to destroy everything our family had worked for. When I knocked on Dad's office door, I heard him scramble to hide papers before telling me to come in. His normally immaculate office was chaos. Documents stacked everywhere, multiple coffee cups on his desk, and a calendar marked with red X's that I assumed were missed deadlines or overdue payments. "Margaret, what a nice surprise," he said, but his smile was forced and his eyes were red-rimmed from stress and lack of sleep. "What brings you by today?" I didn't want to betray Linda's confidence, so I approached the subject carefully. "Dad, I've been worried about you. You seem so stressed lately, and I know something's wrong. Linda mentioned the business is going through some challenges. Can you please tell me what's really happening?" For a moment, I thought he might finally open up. His shoulders sagged, and he looked older than his 65 years. But then he straightened up and put on the same fake, confident expression he'd been wearing for months. "Sweetheart, every business goes through ups and downs. Yes, we're having some cash flow issues because a major client didn't pay us on schedule. But I've been handling problems like this for 25 years. I'll figure something out. I always do." He reached across the desk and patted my hand. "You don't need to worry about any of this. I would never let anything happen to this family." But I was already worried, and his reassurances felt empty. "Dad, Linda told me about the loan and the collateral. She said you might lose the house. Why didn't you tell us? Why are you trying to handle this alone?" His expression changed immediately. The fake smile disappeared, replaced by a combination of anger and embarrassment. "Linda had no business discussing my private financial matters with you. This is exactly why I didn't want the family involved. You don't understand business, Margaret. You think teaching third graders prepares you to understand construction finance and commercial lending. His words hit me like a slap. I may not understand construction, but I understand family. I understand that we're supposed to support each other. I have $45,000 in my savings account and my 401k. If it would help, you can have all of it. Absolutely not. Dad's voice was sharp and final. I will not take money from my daughter to solve problems I created. And even if I would consider it, $45,000 won't even cover 3 months of loan payments. You'd be throwing away your future for nothing. It's not nothing if it helps my family. I was getting emotional, which I knew Dad hated during business discussions. Why won't you let us help? Why are you pushing us away when we could face this together? Because this is my responsibility, he shouted. Then immediately lowered his voice and looked around nervously. I built this business. I made the decisions that led to this situation. And I'll find a way to fix it without dragging my children down with me. We stared at each other across his cluttered desk, and I realized there was a fundamental disconnect between us. Dad saw asking for help as failure and weakness. I saw refusing help as pride and stubbornness. Neither of us was going to change the other's mind, but I left his office that day convinced that family should mean more than ego. That evening I called Kenneth and Donna separately to tell them what I'd learned. Their reactions were even worse than I'd anticipated and revealed sides of my siblings I'd never seen before. Kenneth's response was immediate and harsh. Are you serious? Dad mortgaged the house. How could he be so irresponsible with money? There was no sympathy in his voice, only anger and blame. This is exactly why I've always kept my finances separate from the family business. I knew something like this would happen eventually. When I suggested that we pool our resources to help Dad, Kenneth became defensive about his own financial obligations. Margaret, I have twin boys who will be starting college in 3 years. Sandra and I have our own mortgage car payments and a responsibility to secure our children's future. I can't risk my family's stability because Dad made poor business decisions. But Kenneth, this is about Mom and Dad's house. This is about the business Dad spent his entire adult life building. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I was shocked by his coldness, but his next words were even more devastating. Look, I feel bad for Dad, but business is business. If he can't manage his finances properly, maybe he shouldn't be running a company. I worked hard to build my career and my savings. I'm not going to throw it away on a lost cause. Donna's reaction was different but equally disappointing. When I explained the situation, she was sympathetic but ultimately just as unwilling to help. Oh my God, poor Dad. He must be so stressed. But Margaret, Gerald, and I just bought the practice from his partner. We have our own massive loans to worry about. Gerald would never agree to risk our financial security for what sounds like a failing business. Donna, we're not talking about a business investment. We're talking about saving our parents' home and Dad's life's work. Don't you think we owe him that much? I was pleading now, desperate to make my siblings understand what was at stake. Of course I want to help, but I have to be realistic. Even if the 3 of us pooled all our money, would it be enough? And what happens when Dad gets into trouble again next year? We can't keep bailing him out forever. Donna's logic was sound, but it felt heartless given what our family was facing. Both conversations left me feeling completely alone and questioning everything I'd believed about family loyalty. I'd grown up thinking the Harrison children would always support each other and our parents. Instead, I was discovering that my siblings viewed family relationships through the lens of financial self-interest. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about Dad's situation. I researched the loan details Linda had mentioned and learned that the bank's deadline was just 2 weeks away. If Dad couldn't make the payment or negotiate an extension, foreclosure proceedings would begin immediately. I also discovered that construction company bankruptcies often happen quickly once they begin because projects get canceled and creditors demand immediate payment. I made a decision that would change everything. Against Dad's explicit wishes and without telling Kenneth or Donna, I liquidated my entire 401k and took out a personal loan against my car and credit cards. It wasn't enough to solve Dad's problem completely, but it was $80,000 that could buy him time to find other solutions. The day I walked into Dad's office with a cashier's check for $80,000 will forever be burned into my memory. I'd expected gratitude relief, maybe even tears of joy. Instead, Dad looked at the check, and his face turned red with anger. "What have you done?" he demanded, pushing the check back across his desk toward me. "Margaret, please tell me you didn't destroy your financial future for this." "Dad, it's enough to buy you 3 months. Maybe 4 if you negotiate with the bank. That's time to find new clients, finish existing projects, or explore other options. I don't need you to be grateful, but I need you to accept it." "I will not accept this." His voice was low and dangerous. "I told you not to get involved and you went behind my back anyway. How dare you treat me like a charity case? How dare you assume I can't handle my own problems?" "Because you're not handling them," I shouted back, my own anger finally boiling over. "You're sitting here letting everything fall apart because you're too proud to ask for help. Mom doesn't even know how bad things are, does she? You're going to let her lose the house she's lived in for 30 years rather than swallow your pride. Don't you dare lecture me about pride." Dad stood up and pointed his finger at me. "I've been supporting this family since before you were born. I've worked 70-hour weeks for 25 years to build something meaningful. I will not let my daughter sacrifice her future to clean up my mistakes. And I won't let my father destroy himself because he thinks asking for help makes him weak." I was crying now, frustrated and hurt by his refusal to see my gesture as love rather than pity. "This isn't about your pride, Dad. This is about family. This is about the people who love you wanting to fight for you even when you won't fight for yourself." Our argument continued for another 20 minutes, with both of us saying things we'd probably regret later. Dad accused me of being naive and reckless with money. I accused him of being selfish and stubborn. Finally, he delivered the words that would haunt me for months afterward. "If you can't respect my decisions and stay out of my business, maybe you don't belong in this family anymore. Maybe you should focus on your own life and let me handle mine." I left the check on his desk and walked out of his office knowing our relationship had fundamentally changed. Dad had never spoken to me with such coldness and rejection. I'd tried to save him, and he'd responded by pushing me away completely. Within hours, Kenneth and Donna had called me. Dad had told them about my reckless financial gesture, and they were both furious. Kenneth accused me of making the whole family look bad and enabling Dad's poor decision-making. Donna said I was too emotional to think clearly about money and had made things worse for everyone. For the first time in my life, I felt completely isolated from the family I'd always trusted and cherished. Mom was caught in the middle, trying to mediate between Dad and me while dealing with her own stress about their financial crisis. The family dinners stopped happening. Phone calls became rare and tense. The Harrisons were falling apart, and somehow I'd become the villain in everyone else's story. 2 weeks passed without any contact from my family, except a brief text from Mom about the annual family reunion. Every year in late May, we gathered at Mom and Dad's house for a big celebration that included grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends. It was the highlight of our family calendar, a day filled with games, barbecue, and stories that connected us to our shared history. Mom's text was simple. "Annual family reunion this Sunday. Your father wants to talk to everyone." I felt a surge of hope that maybe Dad had come to his senses and was ready to accept help. Maybe the reunion would be the perfect opportunity for our family to come together and solve this crisis as a team. I spent Saturday preparing Dad's favorite dishes to bring to the reunion. I made his beloved peach cobbler, the green bean casserole he always requested for holidays, and a batch of the chocolate chip cookies I'd been making for family gatherings since I was 16. I wanted everything to be perfect for what I hoped would be our reconciliation. Sunday morning, I woke up early and carefully arranged everything in containers. I picked out a yellow sundress that Dad had always said made me look like sunshine, and I practiced what I might say to rebuild our relationship. I was willing to apologize for overstepping boundaries if that's what it took to get our family back on track. At exactly 9:30 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a text message from Dad. When I read it, my world collapsed. Don't come to the family reunion. We're cutting ties. I stared at the message, reading it over and over, unable to process what was happening. Cutting ties. What did that even mean? I immediately called Dad's number, but it went straight to voicemail. I called Mom, but her phone was off. I tried Kenneth and Donna, but neither answered. Over the next 3 hours, I called Dad's number 67 more times. Each call went to voicemail. I left messages begging him to explain what was happening, pleading with him to let me come to the reunion, promising I would respect his decisions about the business if he would just talk to me. By 12:30, I couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. I drove to my parents' house, determined to understand what was happening, even if I wasn't welcome. The driveway and street were filled with cars, proving that the reunion was happening exactly as planned. I was the only family member who had been excluded. I parked 3 houses away and walked to my parents' property, my heart pounding with anxiety and hurt. I could hear laughter and conversation coming from the backyard, the familiar sounds of our family gatherings that had been the soundtrack of my entire life. But for the first time ever, I was on the outside looking in. I crept around to the side of the house, staying hidden behind Mom's prize-winning rose bushes. Through the kitchen window, I could see into the dining room where several people were seated around the table. What I saw made my blood run cold. Dad was sitting at the head of the table, but the other people weren't family members. I recognized 2 men in business suits who I'd seen at Dad's office occasionally over the years. There was a woman with a briefcase and several documents spread across the table. Kenneth and Donna were there too, both dressed more formally than usual for a family reunion. I moved closer to the window, straining to hear their conversation. What I heard next shattered every assumption I'd made about my family and revealed a betrayal so profound that I'm still processing it months later. "So we're all in agreement," Dad was saying in a voice that sounded nothing like the stressed, desperate man I'd been trying to help. "The sale price is $2.8 million, to be divided according to the partnership agreement we've established." Sale price partnership agreement. I pressed closer to the window, my hands shaking as I pulled out my phone and started recording. One of the business-suited men was reviewing documents. "Mr. Harrison, this has been an extremely smooth transaction. Your company's reputation and client list make this acquisition very attractive. We're pleased to move forward." Kenneth leaned forward, his voice clear and confident. "And you're certain the timeline works for everyone? We want to make sure all the legal details are handled properly before we finalize everything." Donna nodded in agreement. "Gerald reviewed the contracts last week. Everything looks good from our perspective. We're ready to proceed." Dad smiled, actually smiled, and I realized with growing horror that there was no financial crisis. There had never been a financial crisis. Everything I'd witnessed, every conversation about loans and foreclosure, every sleepless night I'd spent worrying about my family's future had been an elaborate lie. "The timing couldn't be better," Dad continued. "With Margaret out of the picture, we can move forward without any complications. She would have just gotten emotional and made everything more difficult." Kenneth laughed, and the sound made me physically sick. "She's always been too soft-hearted for business. Remember how she wanted to give you all her savings? She never would have understood that this sale has been in the works for 6 months." "Poor little Margaret," Donna added with a tone that dripped condescension. "She still thinks family means sharing everything equally. She never learned that business is about making smart decisions, not emotional ones." Dad nodded seriously. "I hated lying to her, but she never could keep a secret. If she'd known we were selling the company, she would have told everyone in town. The buyers wanted discretion until the deal was final." The woman with the briefcase spoke up. "And you're confident there won't be any legal challenges, no other family members who might claim an interest in the business?" "Margaret was never officially part of the company," Dad replied smoothly. "I made sure of that years ago. Kenneth and Donna have been my business partners for the past 5 years. Margaret was she was just the baby of the family who never quite grew up." I felt like I was drowning while standing on dry land. Every word was like a physical blow, destroying not just my understanding of the current situation, but my entire perception of my family relationships. The financial crisis was fake. The desperation was fake. Dad's refusal of my help wasn't about pride. It was about protecting a secret sale that had been planned for months. But the worst part was still coming. As I stood there recording their conversation, I heard Dad explain the real reason I'd been excluded from everything. Margaret always was Daddy's little girl, he said with what sounded like affection but felt like mockery. She believed everything I told her about the business because she wanted to be helpful. It was actually perfect cover. Having her worry about our finances made the whole story more believable to anyone who might have been suspicious. The recording on my phone captured every word, as my family sold the business I'd thought was failing, divided money I'd never known existed, and laughed about how easily they'd manipulated me into believing their lies. 28 years of Sunday dinners, holiday traditions, and heart-to-heart conversations had been preparation for this moment when they would betray me completely. I stood outside that kitchen window for another 5 minutes, recording everything and letting the full scope of their deception sink in. They weren't just selling Dad's business. They were stealing my inheritance, my place in the family, and my right to participate in decisions that affected all of us. I'd been systematically excluded and lied to, not because I was incompetent, but because they saw me as a threat to their plans. When I'd heard enough, I walked around to the front door and let myself in with the key I'd had since I was 16. The sound of the door opening caused immediate silence in the dining room, followed by frantic whispers and the shuffling of papers. I walked into the dining room and stood in the doorway looking at each person seated around the table that had hosted so many family meals. Dad's face went pale when he saw me. Kenneth and Donna both looked guilty and trapped. The business people looked confused and uncomfortable. "So this is the family reunion I was banned from," I said, holding up my phone to show them I'd been recording. "Very interesting guest list, Dad. I don't remember you mentioning that the reunion would include the people buying your supposedly failing company." The silence was deafening. Dad started to speak, but I held up my hand to stop him. "Please don't insult my intelligence with more lies. I heard everything. The $2.8 million sale, the 6-month planning process, the partnership agreement that somehow includes Kenneth and Donna but not me. I heard you laughing about how gullible I was and how perfectly I played into your story." Kenneth found his voice first. "Margaret, you need to understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "I understand that while I was liquidating my retirement account to save the family business, you were negotiating to sell it. I understand that while I was losing sleep worrying about Mom and Dad losing their house, you were calculating how to divide millions of dollars without including me." Donna tried a different approach. "We were trying to protect you. You're not cut out for business negotiations. We thought it would be easier." "Easier for who?" My voice was getting louder and I didn't care. "Easier for you to steal my share of Dad's life's work. Easier for you to exclude me from decisions about our family's future. Easier for you to lie to my face for 6 months while you planned this behind my back." Dad finally stood up, and for a moment I thought he might actually apologize. Instead, he tried to justify what they'd done. "Margaret, sweetheart, you have to understand that business decisions can't be made based on emotions. This sale is the best thing for everyone. The company was struggling more than you knew, and this gives us all financial security." "Don't call me sweetheart." I was amazed by how calm my voice sounded, even though I was shaking with rage and hurt. "And don't lie to me anymore. I heard you tell these people that the company reputation and client list made it attractive. That doesn't sound like a struggling business to me." The businesswoman cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should reschedule this meeting. It seems like there are family matters to discuss." "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone again, "I think you should stay and hear this. Did my father mention that I've been a silent partner in Harrison Construction since my 18th birthday? Did he tell you that he gave me 5% ownership as a graduation gift, and that it's been documented in your corporate filings for 14 years? The color drained from Dad's face. I could see Kenneth and Donna exchange panicked glances. This was information they'd forgotten or hoped I'd never remember. "I may not understand construction," I continued, "but I understand contract law. and I understand that selling a company without the consent of all partners is illegal. So until we resolve this ownership issue, no sale can proceed. I turned to address the buyers directly. I'm sure you'll want to verify all ownership documents before finalizing any purchase. I'd hate for there to be legal complications after you've invested time and money in what you thought was a clean transaction. The lead buyer stood up immediately. Mr. Harrison, you assured us that all family ownership issues had been resolved. If there are disputed claims, we'll need to postpone indefinitely until this is sorted out. There's no dispute, Dad said quickly, but his voice lacked conviction. Margaret is just upset about being left out of preliminary discussions. There's a very big dispute, I replied firmly. And it's not about being left out of discussions. It's about being defrauded by my own family. I'll be contacting an attorney tomorrow morning to protect my interests in this company. Within 15 minutes, the buyers had packed up their documents and left. The sale that Dad, Kenneth, and Donna had been planning for 6 months was completely derailed. The money they'd been counting on was gone, at least temporarily. After the business people left, we had the most brutal conversation in our family's history. Kenneth and Donna tried to convince me that I was overreacting, that they'd planned to give me a share of the proceeds, even though I wasn't officially part of the sale. Dad alternated between anger at my interference and attempts to manipulate me with emotional appeals about family loyalty. But I was done being manipulated. I was done being treated like the naive little sister who couldn't handle adult responsibilities. I was done with their lies, their condescension, and their assumption that I would just accept whatever they decided was best for me. You want to talk about family loyalty? I asked them. Let's talk about how loyal it was to lie to me for 6 months. Let's talk about how loyal it was to exclude me from the biggest financial decision in our family's history. Let's talk about how loyal it was to mock me for trying to help when you thought I was too stupid to protect myself. Mom had been sitting silently through this entire confrontation, and I could see that she was learning about the deception for the first time. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking as she realized that her husband and 2 of her children had conspired to exclude and deceive their own family member. "Harold," she said quietly, "how could you do this? How could you lie to Margaret and to me about something this important? Agnes, you don't understand business." Dad started, but Mom cut him off. "I understand right and wrong. I understand that Margaret has been part of this family for 32 years and deserves to be treated with honesty and respect. What you've done is unforgivable." The reunion that was supposed to celebrate our family connections had become the catalyst for our complete destruction. By the time I left that afternoon, it was clear that the Harrisons, as I'd known them, no longer existed. The aftermath of that devastating Sunday changed everything about my life, but not in the ways I expected. Within a week, Mom had packed a suitcase and moved into my small apartment. She couldn't stay in the same house with Dad after learning about his months of deception. For the first time in 41 years of marriage, she was questioning everything she thought she knew about her husband. I keep thinking about all the nights I comforted him about the financial stress Mom told me as we sat at my kitchen table sharing coffee and tears. All the times I encouraged you kids to be patient with his mood swings because he was dealing with business problems. How could he let me worry like that when none of it was real? Kenneth and Donna initially tried to salvage the family relationships, but their efforts felt hollow and self-serving. Kenneth called to explain that they'd only excluded me to protect me from the stress of business negotiations. Donna sent a long email about how they'd planned to surprise me with a share of the proceeds after everything was finalized. Neither apology addressed the fundamental issues of trust and respect that their actions had destroyed. I hired an attorney who specializes in family business disputes, and what we discovered made the betrayal even deeper. Not only was I legally entitled to 5% of any sale proceeds, but Dad had been paying Kenneth and Donna consulting fees from the company for 5 years without ever mentioning those payments to me. They'd been profiting from the business while I believed I was just the daughter of the owner. The legal process was complicated and emotionally draining. Dad tried to argue that my partnership share was a gift that could be revoked, but the documentation clearly established it as legitimate ownership. Kenneth and Donna hired their own attorney and tried to claim that I'd abandoned my interest by not being actively involved in business operations. 6 months of depositions, document reviews, and negotiations revealed the full scope of how I'd been systematically excluded from family financial decisions. The business was actually thriving, not struggling. The cash flow crisis had been invented to justify Dad's secretive behavior and to prevent me from asking too many questions about company operations. The most painful discovery was that this wasn't the first time they'd made major financial decisions without including me. 3 years earlier, they'd sold a piece of commercial real estate owned by the company and divided the proceeds among the three of them. 2 years before that, they'd taken out a business loan to expand operations and used the money to pay Kenneth and Donna management bonuses that were never disclosed to me. Eventually, we reached a settlement that gave me the option to buy out Kenneth and Donna's interests in the company or sell my share to them at fair market value. I chose to buy them out using a combination of my own resources and a business loan secured by the company's assets. Within a year of that terrible family reunion, I owned 40% of Harrison Construction alongside Dad's 60%. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd gone from being the naive little sister who didn't understand business to being Dad's business partner and the person responsible for much of the company's day-to-day operations. It turned out that my organizational skills, attention to detail, and ability to build relationships served me well in the construction industry. Working with Dad was awkward and tense for the first several months. We maintained professional courtesy during business meetings, but the easy affection that had characterized our relationship for 32 years was gone. He struggled with having to consult me on major decisions, and I struggled with trusting someone who had lied to me so extensively. Mom's presence in my apartment during this transition period was both a comfort and a complication. She was dealing with her own feelings of betrayal and disappointment, questioning whether she could continue her marriage to someone who had deceived her so thoroughly. At 63 years old, she was facing the possibility of starting over, and the uncertainty was overwhelming for both of us. Kenneth and Donna maintained their position that I'd overreacted and destroyed the family over a simple misunderstanding. They blamed me for Mom and Dad's marital problems and for the failure of the business sale that would have provided everyone with financial security. Our relationships became so strained that we stopped communicating entirely except through lawyers. The emotional toll of losing my siblings was devastating. Kenneth had been my protector when I was little, teaching me to ride a bike and helping with homework. Donna had been my confidant during teenage heartbreaks and my supporter when I decided to become a teacher. Losing them felt like losing parts of myself, but I couldn't find a way to reconcile with people who still believed they'd done nothing wrong. Gradually, though, I began to understand that the relationships I'd treasured had been based on their willingness to keep me in a subordinate position. As long as I was the naive little sister who needed their guidance and protection, they loved me. But when I demanded to be treated as an equal adult with valid opinions and legal rights, that love disappeared quickly. The healing process was slow and painful, but it was also liberating. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based on my own judgment, rather than trying to please family members who didn't respect me. I was building a business partnership with Dad that, while complicated, was based on clear boundaries and legal protections. Mom eventually decided to file for divorce, a decision that shocked everyone who knew our family. At 63, she moved into her own apartment and started exploring interests she'd set aside during 4 decades of marriage. She took art classes, joined a book club, and even started dating a retired teacher she met at the community center. A year after the reunion that destroyed our family, I had a new understanding of what family really means. It's not about blood relationships or shared history. It's about mutual respect, honest communication, and the willingness to support each other through difficult times. The people who truly love you don't ask you to accept lies, manipulation, or exclusion for the sake of keeping the peace. I learned that sometimes the biggest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who don't value you, even when those people are family. I learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish or destructive. It's necessary for maintaining your dignity and self-respect. Most importantly, I learned that wholeness doesn't come from family approval or inclusion. It comes from knowing your own worth and refusing to accept treatment that diminishes you. The people who matter will rise to meet your standards, and the people who don't will reveal themselves as people you're better off without. Today, I run a successful construction company with Dad, who has grudgingly learned to respect my contributions and judgment. Mom is thriving in her independent life and has become one of my closest friends and advisors. Kenneth and Donna remain estranged, but I've made peace with their absence from my life. I used to think I needed their approval to be whole. Now I know that wholeness comes from within, and sometimes the biggest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from those who don't value you. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own self-respect? Have you discovered that people you trusted were keeping secrets that affected your life? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family relationships and finding the strength to stand up for yourself. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they deserve honesty and respect from the people who claim to love them. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth isn't determined by other people's willingness to recognize it. May you find the courage to demand the respect you deserve, and may you surround yourself with people who celebrate your strength rather than trying to diminish it.